Today, Dr. Molinas Lliteras will speak to us about digitization as a safeguard of manuscript heritage, the case of the Timbuktu archive. Please join me in welcoming her.
Thank you very much, everyone, for being here, and a special thank you to the Abu Sulayman Center for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be here today. So, as Maria, thank you for the introduction, as she said, but it's really a question. I posed the question, is digitization as a safeguard of manuscript heritage, right? So, the manuscripts of Timbuktu have become synonymous with a pre-colonial written tradition in sub-Saharan Africa over the past 2 decades, shattering colonial discourses on the lack of written traditions in Africa. This iconic archive, while acknowledged and recognized in some quarters, is still largely ignored in mainstream academia, education, and popular discourses on the African continent's history and knowledge production practices. In March 2012, the manuscript collections of Timbuktu were feared to be at risk of destruction after rebel groups overtook the city. Rumors of the burning of the library and the destructions of thousands of manuscripts upon the liberation of the city in 2013 made international headlines, catapulting this archive into a discourse of heritage in peril. The rumors were greatly exaggerated. Many collections were transported from Timbuktu to Bamako through the rescue operation organized by the custodians of the Timbuktu libraries. Others remained safely hidden in Timbuktu, leaving a few thousand manuscripts unaccounted for. And these images that you see here are of the Ahmad Baba Institute, which at the time of the occupation, which is the state collection, was divided among 2 buildings. The old building, which housed approximately 20,000 manuscripts, and the new archive building, which had been built by South Africa and was inaugurated in 2009, and which housed the remaining half of the collection. Most in the basement archive area that you can see, and about 4,000 manuscripts in the upper rooms, which were used for digitization, conservation, and cataloging. This was the building that was occupied by the insurgents and was in fact used as their headquarters. And with their retreat in January 2013 with the advance of the Malian and the French army, the upper rooms were ransacked, the computers, scanners, and other IT equipment stolen, conservation boxes burnt, and some manuscripts stolen. However, all the manuscripts in the basement archive were left untouched. The rescue operation, organized by the custodians of the Timbuktu libraries and assisted by several international organizations, saw the transportation of about 300,000 manuscripts, and it's a bit of a disputed figure, but we don't have time to go into that, to Bamako, which is the capital. The operation took more than 7 months, from June 2012 to January 2013, and the manuscripts were transported in 2,400 metal lockers, mostly by car, but also by donkeys or by canoes on the Niger River. The manuscripts were placed in improvised storage rooms in Bamako, and since that time there have been several international and Malian initiatives devoted to the manuscripts' preservation, cataloging, and digitization. And this is really the event that propelled the archives into new digitization initiatives led by international organizations to preserve the archive from future loss. In what follows, I will analyze one of these recent digital projects, Google Arts and Culture's Mali Magic theme, and then offer an overview of the different digitization initiatives of the Timbuktu archive, highlighting some of the problems of digitization as the current chosen mode of preservation against loss in the archive, and the effects of treating manuscript archives exclusively as cultural heritage. So in March 2022, Google Arts and Culture launched a new theme called Mali Magic as part of its ever-expanding digital collection. The theme is intimately linked to the fear of loss of Malian heritage, and the digitization project is presented as a solution to safeguard against the loss. The theme is subdivided into 4 sub-themes, the 4 M's of Mali: manuscripts, music, monuments, and modern art, which are, I quote, flourishing against all odds against a background of unimaginable loss, highlighted repeatedly in the written, video, and sonic offerings. As one has come to expect from Google, this digital project is impeccably and engagingly designed, combining animation, videos, film, and sound contributions. The first point I want to highlight is the name of the project, Mali Magic. The linking of magic and Mali evokes ideas of witchcraft, mystery, myth, and the supernatural, which have long histories in the study of Africa, forcefully determining research directions for decades. Moreover, including the Timbuktu manuscript under such a theme recalls the long association of Timbuktu itself with myth and mystery, which has had shaping effect on how the manuscripts of the city are cast in public discourse. The effects are exemplified by the selection offered in the manuscripts section. And here I'm going to present a bit of a simplified narrative, but it can be simplified thus. First, Mali is cast as a home to a tolerant and inclusive variety of Islam, as opposed to that of the Middle East, with remnants of African culture. And this is presented kind of a syncretic African Islam that is suspiciously similar to the concept of Islam noir developed by French Africanists during the colonial period to depoliticize Islam in sub-Saharan Africa, which contributed to the relegation of its study as a strictly anthropological phenomenon and sidelining the study of its intellectual traditions. The development of this concept had both policy effects in colonial West and North Africa, as well as lasting effects in academia. Studies of Islam and history in Mali are still sharply divided between anthropologists and historians, those that study oral traditions or written traditions, and there's little overlap in both methods and themes. Moreover, the narrative that is presented in this suggests that the manuscripts of Timbuktu can be served as a kind of unifying object around which peace in Mali can be built, drawing from the lessons on conflict resolution and peacemaking that can be found in the manuscripts. However, the selection of these themes, along with the description of the selected manuscript, of course to the exclusion of others, decontextualizes the manuscripts from their intellectual and cultural context in which they were produced. By mystifying the manuscripts and their content and removing them from their intellectual context as products of a wider tradition of Islamic scholarship across West Africa and the broader Muslim world, the significance of the manuscript libraries of Timbuktu is misunderstood. The second aspect of the narrative that is presented presents the political crisis, and here I just want to, the political crisis in northern Mali, the insurgency and the ongoing instability in the Sahel in a simplistic, decontextualized account of jihadist terrorism, provoking massive loss and destruction of the country's heritage. Within this good Muslim versus bad Muslim discourse, little mention is made of the human, ecological, political, and global aspects of the crisis. The massive displacements of people, the escalation of the conflict between pastoralist and agriculturist communities, the increasing environmental degradation and subsequent augmented competition on resources, the recurring coups d'etats of the last few years, the global network of arms, drugs, and people smuggling operating in the Sahara and the Sahel, not to speak of the ongoing geopolitical and strategic interests of the former colonial powers and global north countries in the region. In this way, the Mali Magic Project focuses on jihadist terrorism as the main threat to heritage in Mali. The loss in the archive is thus relegated to a very particular contemporary phenomenon, obscuring its long history and recurring iterations derived from multiple causes. So, the digital project offered by Google is presented not only as a curated online exhibitions, videos, sonic recordings and stories, and educational material and lesson plans, but also a central aspect is the digital archive of Timbuktu manuscripts in the form of a Google experiment. This feature, also entitled The Universe of Verse, allows the users to explore more than 40,000 pages of manuscripts. Although sometimes they mention 40,000 manuscripts already, this is problematic, safeguarded by Dr. Abdelkader Haidara and Savama Kisiara. However, Google's digital archive is not functional or usable in any way. There is no way of searching for specific items of interest. There is no metadata to accompany the manuscripts. There are no tools to facilitate reading, not to speak of research. In the case of extreme irony, Google, a company that has developed the most advanced search engine, presents a digital archival experience that lacks even a simple version of this functionality, contributing to another loss for the Timbuktu archive. One wonders if the designers were more interested in creating a innovative visual experience, which it certainly is, but the outcome is the production of an unusable digital archive of unreadable manuscripts. One might want to suggest or argue that perhaps it is the nature of Google as a platform made to appeal to a wider public, which provoked the problems of the digital archive described here. However, I will show next, through a cursory overview of the problematics of different digitization projects dedicated to the Timbuktu manuscripts in the last 2 decades, that many of the problems illustrated here are prefigured in other digitization schemes. So, since the early 2000s, there have been a range of digitization programs dedicated to the manuscripts of Timbuktu, presented as the surest and safest way to safeguard the archive again from future loss. Digitization is touted as the only viable solution to the inevitable decay and loss of the physical archive, while also promising the democratization of access to the archive. Moreover, in the African context, the digitization of cultural heritage is often conflated with broader questions of decolonization. Digitization, however, has often been promoted by external funders and donors, while being often resisted by local librarians and manuscript holders. And I'm not going to go through the different projects, but just to say that the outcomes of some of these different digitization projects were very uneven. The state collection, the Ahmed Baba Institute, managed to digitize about 7,000 manuscripts of various lengths, less than 1/5 of its collection. And in the private collections, much depended on the availability of funds, and concrete numbers were never made available. However, over the years, many of these digital copies were lost, damaged, or rendered obsolete by newer technology. The 2012-2013 crisis was really an inflection point in the digitization schemes. Many of the digital copies of the manuscripts were lost, damaged, or stolen during the evacuation of the manuscripts, and many of the libraries, in particular the family collections, began their digitization efforts anew and from scratch, often duplicating work that had been undertaken in previous years. The international project, Safeguarding the Manuscripts of Timbuktu, coordinated by the Center for the Study of Manuscript Cultures at the University of Hamburg, with funding from the German Federal Foreign Office and the Hertha Henkel Foundation, initially put emergency measures in place and then developed a larger project with the objective of to establish archival facilities in Bamako where the Timbuktu manuscripts could be stored, preserved, and cataloged, and digitized and made accessible to the public. The digitization efforts were led by the Hill Museum and Manuscript Library at St. John's University in Minnesota, with funding from the Dutch Prince Claus Fund, the Arcadia Fund of London, and other donors. This digitization project has been the most successful so far, digitizing thousands of manuscripts while also undertaking serious cataloging efforts. And here we have my colleagues, the wonderful catalogers, accompany the digital items. The British Library, through its Endangered Icons program, has also been involved in several digitization schemes, first in the town of Jenne from 2009 to 2017, and then in Timbuktu in collaboration with the HMML for the 3 major libraries that remained in the town after the 2012-2013 crisis. However, there's a number of problems in these digitization programs, including technical issues, inadaptability to the local characteristics of the manuscripts, questions of intellectual property, cultural heritage, and private property and world heritage. So I'm just going to touch on some of these briefly. So the first major set of issues is technical in nature, relating to the enormous change over time in technologies and digitization standards and protocols, as well as the expertise and funds required to maintain digital projects. As digitization technology developed, depending on the different funders or libraries, standards and protocols change drastically, producing extremely uneven results, lacking in standardization and sometimes compatibility. In addition, the high cost of the digitization equipment and the lack of local expertise and the staff-intensive nature of this work often meant that it was the first activity to stop when the funding was curtailed. And on the other hand, while the actual digital files might be relatively simple to create, what is far more complicated, time-consuming, and expensive is the development and support of the technical and administrative infrastructure to ensure the successful implementation of the project and its sustainability over time. And we will see that's one of the big issues. The second set of issues involves the material and local characteristics of the manuscripts of Timbuktu. Some of you might not know, but most of the manuscripts are loose leaf format, often kept inside leather cases, but also simply wrapped in a cord. Only a few of the manuscripts are bound. On the loose leaves are no doubt easier to digitize than bound manuscripts, but on other issues such as the correct order of the leaves and the completeness of a single manuscript affect digitization and cataloging activities. Another issue is that many of the Timbuktu manuscripts are undated. Thus, digitization should ideally include backlit images that help identify the paper's compositions or the existence of watermarks. And for us, it's based, this is a very important issue because we have very few colophons with actual copying dates. However, such digitization techniques are not a standard practice. And finally, the preservation conditions of many of the collections remain very fragile, with digitization and overhandling of the manuscripts problematic. Another important issue is that of intellectual property and its ramifications. Copyright of digitized manuscripts is theoretically retained by the manuscript owners. However, the standard practice of digitization programs such as those sponsored by the HMML, the British Library, of retaining copies of the digitized material often makes manuscript owners reluctant to accept the schemes. Moreover, they have great concern about free online access, as the custodians feel they will lose control over their collections if they are freely available online, not to speak of the loss of the incentive to travel to the archives in Mali if the material is readily available online. Finally, one can question who benefits from the digitized material when it is available online. It will most likely be researchers and individuals in the global north or developed countries with fast digital infrastructure who can easily browse, download the large files of digitized manuscripts. However, researchers and individuals in Africa or the global south, however, where internet access is limited, sporadic, and expensive, don't necessarily benefit from this access. In addition, a compound problem arises with the academic outputs produced from these digital sources, such as books and articles, which are rarely available in the source's countries of origin, or the global south more generally. And this replicates another of the problematics in the study of Africa as the continent as a source of raw data for the extraction or use by global north for the intellectual production and theorizing. Other issues encompass broader questions of cultural heritage. On the one hand, the manuscripts of Timbuktu are considered cultural heritage objects, but they're also family heirlooms, historical documents, and scholarly and devotional works that form part of an Islamic teaching and learning tradition. In this context, how does the digitization affect the status of the object? This question becomes poignant when dealing with certain manuscripts, such as amulets, which some consider to have a particular powers in their physical manifestation. Digitization in this case could be considered as stripping the object of its very reason for existence. Similarly, there are concerns about sensitive content of some of the materials contained in the manuscripts, such as issues of inheritance, family relations, reputation, which consequence for people and families that are still alive today. Moreover, digitization and remote access to manuscripts creates an artificial distance between the object and its context. This has the potential of stripping manuscript research of crucial contextual and situated knowledge from the communities that created or preserved the manuscripts. The last set of issues is the tension between the Timbuktu manuscripts as both private property and world heritage. Local family librarians emphasize their property rights over the manuscripts as objects that confer upon them both intellectual status as well as potential sources of revenue. At the same time, however, by claiming World Heritage status for the manuscripts and seeking donor funding on those terms, they must negotiate questions such as access to the manuscripts in both digital and physical form. Since the 2012-2013 political crisis and the evacuation of the manuscripts to Bamako, donor agencies have imposed an open access policy in exchange for funding. Thus, currently, one can access a great number of manuscripts from private collections through third-party sites such as the HMML and the British Library, while the state collection restricts, there's no access to the state collection's digitized manuscripts. The HMML project might be considered in some ways a highly successful digitization scheme, as it currently has over 25,000 Malian manuscripts available for browsing, or not downloading, out of a total of about 300,000 digitized manuscripts, through its visual reading room, and thus has facilitated access to the digitized manuscripts and information. And my colleagues here have done an incredible job creating the metadata. Nevertheless, this project also illustrates some of the problematics described previously. Firstly, issues of intellectual property and copyright are fraught. The digital items and metadata are stored in perpetuity on and off-site in Minnesota, relegating the importance of the digital copies kept in their country of origin. This recalls the extraction and continued ownership of African objects in European museums, currently the subject of sustained debates and about repatriation. And I think we should see the reluctance of the state manuscript collection, the Ahmad Baba Institute, to collaborate with the HMML should be understood in this context, as a refusal to cede ownership of Malian national heritage to foreign nations. Moreover, the narrative of the colonial savior resonates strongly in the history of the HMML's preservation efforts, which began in the 1960s with a focus on monastic manuscript heritage in Europe, later expanding to other Eastern Christian churches perceived to be under threat in Africa, in the Middle East, and India, and finally extending to Islamic manuscript from the 2000s. This narrative upholds that the salvation of the manuscript depends on technological, in this case digital expertise, located outside the continent, thus denigrating other local modes of preservation and knowledge transmission. So to conclude, I argue that the recent focus on digitization outlined above obscures the long history of loss, destruction, and remaking that is constitutive of the nature of the Timbuktu archive. I have demonstrated elsewhere that this loss is evidenced through different modes and at different times, and yet is integral to the makeup of the archive. On the one hand, we have the physical anatomy of the manuscripts and their uses in the knowledge transmission and production practices, their physical support, their format, and their intrinsic mobility. On the other, the vicissitudes of their place in the historical events of the region, conquests, revolutions, colonial plunder, and innovations, and independence era archival reconstitution. But a counterpoint to the destructive aspects of loss outlined above is the widespread practice of copying by students, scholars, or scribes as a long preferred mode of preservation and knowledge transmission and production, which represents the generative aspect of loss in the Timbuktu archive. Copying is usually associated with a lack of originality in Western discourses that value the original as a site of creativity, uniqueness, and inventiveness. Our current indictment against the Timbuktu manuscripts is the prevalence of copies in the archive, and it has thus often been denigrated as a derivative archive containing mere copies of original works composed elsewhere, or multiple copies of the same manuscript. However, this conception of copying dismisses the practice's generative, multi-layered, and knowledge-producing aspects. So I argue that integrating loss into the nature of the archive goes against the classical European understanding of archive codified in the 19th century and which persists in many quarters. According to this notion, archival items are embalmed material, usually documents, produced at a particular point in time and offering archival testimony of that time. They are then preserved until the present in their original form or as close as possible. But loss in the archive thus throws into relief the assumed stability or permanence of archival records of all kinds. Moreover, the art of copying is a tradition of reproduction that is ultimately about transformation and change, demonstrating that records ultimately change through the act of reproducing them. So digital copying, on the other hand, which is really but another tradition and method of reproduction, hides behind a fantasy of fidelity to the original and has come to be seen as a perfect reproduction. Beyond preservation, at its most basic, digitization is a distinct form of copying, and one that is increasingly construed as superior to earlier modes of copying. Moreover, during the past decades, as manuscripts are increasingly viewed as cultural heritage, they are conserved along guidelines provided by heritage agencies, specifically digitization, rather than the transmission mechanisms of West African Islamic scholarship, such as copying. So I think the question here is, what is lost in transmission when the mode changes from preservation of knowledge, in our case copying as reproduction, to the preservation of heritage, or digitization as reproduction? And we saw from the examples that even in the most technologically advanced modes of preservation and that reimagined modes of engagement and visualization of the manuscript, much seems to be not lost, including the very priority of collecting, organizing, and utilizing textual repositories. So ironically, the immersive, near virtual reality simulating aspects of the Google Arts and Culture experiment decontextualizes the archive and pales in terms of usability of the manuscripts compared to the handwritten copies and the corresponding palimpsests of annotations and marginalia. The Mali Magic project both enacts the myth of the Timbuktu archive and the possibilities of the digital archive while betraying it at the same time. The archival usability and archival artifactual density of these analog copies relative to the unusable and indeed archivally dysfunctional digital and immersive counterpart provide an avenue for the conceptual probabilization between the perceived binaries of copying and digitization. Thank you.
So the second presentation we have is a joint presentation. Okay. So I will introduce both of our scholars. So first we have Dr. Ali Diakite. He is a cataloger for West African manuscripts at the Hill Museum that we've just heard about. The Hill Museum and Manuscript Library, which is based in Minnesota and where he has worked since 2019. He holds an MA in Arabic Studies from the University of Bamako, as well as an MA and PhD from the École Normale Supérieure in Lyon. Before joining HMML, Dr. Diakite completed a postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, supported by the Gerda Henkel Foundation. A native speaker of Arabic, Fulfulde, and Bambara, he specializes in West African manuscripts, particularly those from Timbuktu. He is co-editing a critical edition of the Tariq al-Fatash and Tariq al-Mukhtar with Dr. Mora Nobili, forthcoming from Oxford University Press. His work focuses on cataloging and digitizing manuscripts, contributing to the global study of West African history and culture. And we also have Dr. Paul Naylor, who is a cataloger of West African manuscripts, also at the Hill Museum and Manuscript Library in Minnesota, which he joined in 2020. He holds a PhD in African Studies from the University of Birmingham, awarded in 2018, and has degrees from the School of Oriental and African Studies and Goldsmiths University of London. His research focuses on African Arabic script manuscripts, and his book, From Rebels to Rulers, Writing Legitimacy in the Sokoto State, was published in 2021. Prior to working at HMML, he was an adjunct professor at Loyola University in Chicago and has lectured in North America and Europe. His career includes cataloging the British Library's West African Arabic script manuscripts and contributing to the 2016 exhibition West Africa Word, Symbol, Song. At the Hill Museum, he works on cataloging manuscripts from Timbuktu's Savama, S-A-V-A-M-A, DCI, project to enhance online access. And Dr. Diakite and Dr. Naylor will be talking about cultural heritage preservation and digitization in West Africa, the work of the Hill Museum and Manuscript Library. Thank you.
Thank you for this presentation. First, I want to thank Abu Sulayman Center for inviting us to we are really thank you because it's the first time, to be honest, think of Paul too, to come directly talk with the community or directly interested in what we are doing. Usually we are between us doing something, but we really appreciate this new cohesion we have. Thank you so much. Yeah. Susana already brought most of the things we want to say, but we will try to calm down a bit now and with some practice, some example what we're doing in HIMO. First, HIMO is mean Hill Museum and Manuscript Library. In German, we call it HIMO, but scale. Yeah.
Heaven.
Heaven. Okay. Yeah. It started exactly 60 years ago, April 1965. Well, exactly 60. This I think that in April. Yeah, exactly. Founded by a Benedictine monk of St. John's Abbey in Minnesota. Think about that time is the Cold War, just after really World War I, World War II, and there was concern if Europe will have another war again, and they tried to microfilm manuscript from Western Europe and to bring them to Minnesota, where they became really safe. That's the main idea of the project in back to 1965. Then it extended to some other places, especially in Ethiopia. In 1970, again, Ethiopia have a civil war. They expand the project from Western Europe to to Ethiopia. And in 2003, they still try to focus on some Christian manuscript. Still now we are on Christian manuscript in the Middle East, India, and other places. In 2012 now, they expand to the what we say Islamic manuscript, Jerusalem, Mali, Pakistan, in other places. If you look at all these maps, you can see like the main idea is just to follow the area we have the manuscript in dangers, the crisis. They are just following the area because our priority is to save the manuscript. That's the idea. In 2000, let me try to move it here. That's the picture in Austria, where we start our microfilm in early 1965. Then Ethiopia, in after 2003, when invasion of Iraq, we moved to Iraq in 2009 to catalog or to check their manuscript. Then Mali, of course. What HIMO do, or what the Hill Museum Institute does, we partner with the library to digitalize their archive and share the manuscript. That's and we focus, as I say, the region where manuscripts are endangered or inaccessible, and provide equipment, training, and support for local workers. And finally, we do safely archive and share image online. That we'll be talking more about this after. Yes, I'm back again. What Susana was saying. In like 10 years ago, 2012 exactly, north of Mali was occupied by different groups. Some of them, the rebellion, want to have their own place, and some of the Islamic group, they all together try to occupy all the north of the Mali, where we have Timbuktu, Gao, many other important places. And early 2013, we have French come to try to help Mali government to recover the north of the Mali. And at the same time, just before that, when the different group or the Islamist group occupied the North Mali, even sometimes the national Mali library was open. Nothing happened to it. But mysteriously in January 2013, at the same time the French military was there, we have some thing happened to the manuscript. We don't know. No one can explain exactly what happened, but some manuscript was destroyed. At the same time, Hill Museum and Manuscript Library tried to travel to Mali and to partnership with the Malian librarian, because at that time we have it's already one of the most important figures that's named Abdul Qadir Haidara. They have an association to preserve the manuscript, and Hill Museum tried to work with them directly because it's already association, already people are working on the manuscript. They try to focus or to work with this organization to digitalize the manuscript. That was between 2014 to 2000, like just 2 years ago. We are finished this program with 36 Timbuktu family library evacuated from, I didn't say that because she already mentioned that, I want to save some time. Because during this summer of 2012, 2013, the manuscript was evacuated from the North Mali to the Bamako, the south, where it's not a good place for them because it's humid, and the manuscript like really the dry in the north, but yeah. Now they are still now they are in the capital of the Mali. Not only the private manuscript, but also the entity Ahmad Baba, what is like the public one today. Yeah. But I talked with the director a few months ago. They try to back home with the manuscript to the north of the Mali again. Just I'm trying to go very fast to give you some idea what we are doing. We digitalized more than 300,000 manuscripts in Mali. They are all now with us here in Minnesota, and we try to work on. Not all the manuscript was took from Timbuktu to Bamako. Some of the manuscripts stayed in Timbuktu, like 3 big mosques, very important mosques, Dingeleper Mosque, Sidiaya Mosque, and Sankore Mosque. They didn't accept to join the association to travel or to relocate manuscripts from Timbuktu to Bamako. They stayed there in their place in the city there. And after Hill Museum finished with this library in Bamako, they back to Timbuktu to negotiate on their contract with the other mosques to work with them. And this one of their different project. And after that, it's in collaboration with the British Library, of course. Then something very similar a bit in the Jenne. Jenne is another city in Mali. South of the Mali is sometimes we call it a twin city of with Timbuktu. It's a very important place where we have the mosque we see. Here is a very known monument in Mali. The Hill Museum tried again to work with British Library to digitalize the Jenne manuscript, but with very different approach. Because the first one, I didn't say that, it's a huge collection. Each library have more than 4,000, 6,000 manuscripts. But for the Jenne, it's like each family can bring their manuscript, maybe 5, 6, 7 manuscripts. They build a house next to the mosque. You have your manuscript there, it's yours. Thus, we digitalize them, and you can bring your manuscript back to your home if you want. Completely different. We really think, me and Paul, is very nice or very good project, because you own your manuscript. You can bring them like a 6, 10, or 20 manuscript, but you can come back to took them anytime you want to back home with you. And after Mali, we still around West Africa, because now we move to Mauritania. Mauritania is a very interesting place because it's the bridge between North Africa and West Africa. It's exactly the same culture, the same population, the same idea. We now Hill Museum digitalizing manuscript now from Mauritania, and we think it's really extension of the Mali, and we hope for that will be very good. Now cataloging, we catalog more than in all Hill Museum we have more than I don't like the number, for more than 400,000 manuscripts we have, and most of them today is Islamic manuscript because of the Malian manuscript. Yeah. And Paul and I, we catalog more than 28,000 manuscripts already in online, and it's free for people to read them or to do research. That's, I will stop here, and Paul will continue with some highlights.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thank you, Ali. Thanks, everyone. So in the time that remains, I'm going to try to do a couple of things. The first is really, I think Susana made a good point that, when we're talking about cultural heritage, we're talking about these sort of projects, there doesn't seem to be a memory of what came before. And so what I want to do is to situate our efforts in the longue durée of approaches to Mali's written heritage, and then also to talk about some of the things we're doing to correct or to make the best of a situation that, as also Susana mentioned, there are many problematic aspects of digitization. We're going to show you how we're trying to do things, sensitive to these issues, and hopefully that will increase access to the collection. So twofold. So we presented on this before in another concept. You can find it online, I think. So I'll just give a very brief summary here of the three phases, really, of Mali's written heritage. And the first, the colonial period, late 19th century, is essentially Mali's written archive, as well as cultural artifacts, are essentially treated as a spoil of war. They're confiscated after the conquest of Ségou, which was sort of the stronghold of resistance to French colonization in the region. They're taken to Paris, and it's only in the 1980s that the collection is catalogued fully. So that's more than 90 years since it arrived in Paris. And so obviously this is not a model that we want to replicate in any means, and there's no plans to return this to Mali. It remains in Paris. Yeah. And then we have this very interesting period, in the 60s and 70s, of nationalist state archive building. This is the period in which Mali and other African countries are newly independent. They want to create a stable narrative of their country's pre-colonial past. And the way to do that, of course, is to collect archives from private families and put them into national archive institutions such as Ahmed Baba, and to tell stories about them, to fund research, to fund scholarship. This is the Sankore magazine, which was this biannual journal produced by the Ahmed Baba Center starting in the 1980s. And then on the left, of course, we see an aspect of Pan-African collaboration, which is South Africa paid for a new archive building to host the manuscripts. So all of this work to build state archives really stopped in the late 2000s because of economic restructuring. A lot of the loans that were given to African countries told these states to reduce the size of the state, especially when it came to culture, and to essentially outsource a lot of these functions to civil society and to the private sector. And so really the career of Abdul Qadir Haider encapsulates this shift from a public to a private archiving. So Abdul Qadir used to be an agent for the Ahmadiyya Center. His job was to buy manuscripts, purchase manuscripts on behalf of the state, move them to the National Archive. But on the side, he was also building up his own manuscript collection, and he got funding from, I think, the Ford Foundation, I think other private foundations to really grow his collection. So it started off with about 4,000 manuscripts. Today it's 40,000 manuscripts. So that's more than the National Archives itself because of these private partnerships. Because of course, NGOs are private organizations. They like to work with other private organizations. So we have a lot of issues, as Susana mentioned, with essentially these massive libraries that are no longer family libraries, because why would a family need 40,000 manuscripts? These are sort of manuscripts as numbers, manuscripts as money. This is the way that NGOs do their work. They, especially if it's in a country that's foreign to them, they base it on numbers, project outcomes, project goals is a numbers focused thing. But given the fact that me and Ali have 300,000 manuscripts, we can't reverse this reality. And how do we start? And we are very aware that we have an important role here, bringing Mali's written heritage into the digital age, and we want to be very sensitive of what's come before, and recognize that this is a new phase of archiving, and how do we do this properly? So, the first thing is that, for a very long time, West Africa's archives were not known outside of the region. And, when we're talking about metadata, such as Library of Congress, such as the Virtual International Authority file, these are ways in which libraries catalog their collections. They're sort of stable authorities of names, of titles, of places, of people. West Africa was not represented at all. It was really underrepresented in these collections. So every author that we create, every title that we create, every place that we create goes to Library of Congress, and it goes to the Virtual International Authority file. So what this means is that now we create West African individuals, the titles of West African manuscripts. These are all available to anybody all across the world who may have items in their collection by these local authors, and it's a way that they're recognized really on the global scale in a way that is accessible. You can see very different variants, both in Arabic, in transliteration, and then also in the way that we can't do this on Library of Congress, but on our own authority file, we have ways to represent these individuals as they would have been known in their local cultures. So this is one example, Ibrahim Soumare. Soumare is a very common family name in the region today. We have a transliteration of his name in Arabic, but then we also have Soumare as it was written today. So this guy, he's active 1920, he probably has grandchildren alive today who we hope would be able to search for this person in the way that they knew this individual. And then this is also available worldwide. So just as we think that it's normal that, Erasmus or whatever you want can be available through his databases, these individuals from West Africa are also available globally. And the other good thing about digitalization is that, previous projects tended to sort of cherry pick the best manuscripts for showcasing West Africa's heritage, and usually this would be copies of the Quran, legal works, the Dalal al-Khairat, which is a book of prayers and praise of Prophet Muhammad, all written by or coming from outside of the region, but just a very nice copy. But in these digitalization projects, every single piece of paper is photographed and digitized and preserved, and so that's really given us some pretty stunning finds of the range of the kind of documents that were in these libraries. So we have an eyewitness account of the 1755 Lisbon earthquake. This was also felt in West Africa. This is the first time we've seen an eyewitness account of this document. We have a lot of esoteric practices, occult practices that we can see here. We have the reuse of paper from the colonial period, so we have a lot of colonial paper that's being reused for different things. We even had a paper in German the other day. How did that make it to the collection? We don't know. Very old letters, hundreds of letters, both old and new. And we have whole local genres of works that were not really known outside of the region. We have these amazing stories about the exploits of Ali, the Prophet's companion Ali, the exploits of Moses, stories of the prophets, but with sort of very interesting details such as talking camels and birds that tell you all sorts of pieces of wisdom. All these amazing storytelling traditions that we're capturing here. We're also working, me and Ali, we're also writing at the moment a paper on article about local traditions of Aqidah or Tawheed traditions, that were really unknown outside of the region until these digitization projects. But then we also have, so this is just to show you the richness of the collection within Timbuktu, but it's also, the Himmel website allows you to capture the cross-connectivity. It allows you to show that, yes, the Timbuktu collection is unique, but it's also speaking to other collections all across the world. A really good example of this is Jesus on the talking skull. So Jesus, Isa, he's walking around, he sees this skull, the skull starts talking to him. It says, I was an ancient king, I did all these sins, and blah, blah, blah. We have the same collection, we have it in Timbuktu, in Arabic, we have it from Turkey, we have it in Iraq, we have it in Syria, we have it in Arabic Gashuni, we have it in both Muslim and Christian traditions. The same story, but just represented in these collections all across the world. So it shows you, on one website, you can see how the world was very much globalized and knowledge was very much globalized in really unexpected ways. So what would be some signs of success? So obviously, we need many more years of our work to fully catalog the collection. But what would be some signs that we're doing a good job? The first thing is that we would expect to see an increase of users of our website from Mali and from West Africa. This is happening, as it happened with our Ethiopian collections. I think last month, more people from Ethiopia accessed the collection than people in Europe and the United States. So we would hope to see the same thing happening from Mali and West Africa. Internet access is increasing at really phenomenal speeds in the region, so we hope that to see more people from West Africa using the website. Also, up until recently, scholars of West Africa, Western institutions just want to know about history. They just want to know about historical chronicles, king lists, dates, even though these things are really not represented in the collections, hardly at all. Most of it is religious text, legal text, because that's what people were interested in. So you have historians looking for things that aren't actually there. We hope that this can be corrected, and that there's a lot more research into Aqidah, let's say, or into Maliki law and things of this nature, because these texts are now available. It's very clear that was the focus of the people of that time. And then also, just like this, more collaboration between secular and Islamic research institutions, because we're siloed. We're siloed into Islamic studies on the one hand and history on the other hand. And we hope that because all of these texts are available on the same website and appeal to a wide variety of researchers will say, oh, actually, this is quite interesting, it's not in my field, but I'm going to take a look, I'm going to click on this image. So these are the kind of things that tell us that we're doing a good job. So please visit our website, be inspired by what you find, and I'm happy to talk more. Thank you.